I grew up in a smallish city in Europe, but moved away before my teenage years. However, I would go back every summer, at first with my parents, then by myself, to visit relatives and friends. We had an apartment that was located off of a large boulevard, and a smaller street led straight to the downtown area. It was about a 10 to 15 minute walk downtown, and I must have walked that same route hundreds of times in my life. One summer, when I was old enough to travel by myself and go out drinking with friends, I was walking home down that same street. It wasn't late, maybe 10 on a warm summer night. A storm was brewing, so the air felt heavy and there were strong gusts of wind. All in all, it was a bit creepy out to begin with. Luckily, I had only had a few drinks and was relatively sober. As I started walking down the street, I could hear someone walking behind me. In general, I hate when people I don't know are behind me, so I stopped to light a cigarette, don't judge rebellious teenage years, and I let him pass. As he walked by, he asked me for a light, which I gave him, and we even joked about the weather. At this point, he was walking in front of me, with some distance between us, but at every intersection, he would turn onto the cross street, but when he saw that I was going straight, he would swerve back onto the street I was on. So, essentially, he was following me, being in front of me. Bizarre, but I just assumed he was some drunk dumbass. After the fourth time this happened, I started to kind of freak out, especially since my building was coming up, and to make matters worse, there was a construction site next to my building. The basic structure was already up, but the openings were covered by tarps, and it was pitch black in there, so the perfect place to be yanked into. I grabbed my key and put it in my hand, ready to either open the door as fast as I can or punch him with the key between my knuckles as a last-ditch effort. As he got closer to the construction site, he started slowing down and looking back at me. At that point, I picked up the pace and bolted for the entrance. Luckily, he was at the far side of the building under construction, so I made it through the door and into my building. I booked it upstairs and sat in the dark for the next hour so he didn't know which apartment was mine. I occasionally looked out the window to see if he was still there. He was, for about 30 minutes. He stood outside the apartment building for 30 fucking minutes, staring up at the windows. I barricaded the door and slept with a knife next to the bed that night and made sure I had an escort on the way home after that. So, that's my story of how I was awkwardly followed by a stranger and could have potentially been dragged into a building site and assaulted. It feels corny to start this by saying it was a dark and stormy night. So let's just say the weather was shit. I was on my way to a convention in Chicago with two of my good friends. We went every year, and this was the fourth time. The Weather Channel called for severe weather, but we refused to miss our annual overnight trip. We all piled in my car for a 6-hour drive. The first few hours were fine, just raining and humid. Then the typical Midwest severe thunderstorm started, the kind where you just look down at the lines on the road so you don't end up in the ditch since you can't see anything else. Once, when the lightning flashed, my friend Chris swore he saw a tornado in the cornfields in the distance. We finally gave up and pulled under a bridge until the rain let up enough for us to see. We waited a good 45 minutes and were running hours late from driving so slow through the storm. The rest of the trip was drizzle and that post-thunderstorm fog that has always felt so creepy to me. There were hardly any other cars on the interstate, since most people were too smart to be out driving, which just added to the creepy feeling. We didn't get to our motel until about 2 a.m. Since we were poor college kids, we never stayed at the convention hotel. Luckily, we had found a little motel a 20-minute drive away that was dirt cheap. We stayed at this motel every time we came to the convention. It was 3 stories tall and with no interior hallways. All the rooms were accessed from outside. Unfortunately, the cheapest rooms were on the 3rd floor, and the elevator had not worked any of the times we visited. Checking into the motel in the middle of the night was interesting. It was still foggy and drizzling out, but also humid and hot. There were only 2 or 3 other cars in the dark parking lot, and the only lights were from the lobby and the street lights. We walked inside, and no one was at the desk. After ringing the bell for about 15 minutes with no response, we actually called the motel from my friend's cell phone. An older man answered the phone, and soon came out to the desk from a back room. We tried to negotiate a 1st floor room since obviously they were not busy. He was a jerk though, and kept saying, "They're booked." There were 2 or 3 other cars there. Certainly some room on the 1st floor had to be available. Being exhausted, we took our 3rd floor room and prepared ourselves to drag our suitcases up 3 flights of outside stairs in the drizzle and heat. As we left the lobby, the old man called out to us,
"You kids lock your doors and don't answer it after dark."
He went back into the back room and slammed the door. God, that creeped me out. We unloaded the car in the foggy, dark parking lot and dragged our luggage to the stairs. As we came around the back of the building, we all saw the elevator. The out of order sign was gone, and the doors were open. The light in the elevator was the only light source on the entire back of the building. It seemed like something good finally happened to us on this trip. The elevator was working, and we didn't have to lug all of our things up those slippery stairs. I remember thinking it was weird that the doors were open. Didn't elevators usually stay closed until you push the button? But whatever. It was better than stairs. We loaded in our luggage and got in. I pushed the button for the 3rd floor, and the doors started to close. The doors were standard elevator doors, and right before they closed all the way, words appeared. Written in red paint or marker on the far side of the elevator door so that it was only visible when the door closed. It said, "Well, you fucked now. Sorry, fuckers." The elevator started moving. We all stared at the door. My friend Chris, from behind, said the obvious thing we were all thinking. "Guys, I think we're fucked." It took the damn elevator forever to get to the 3rd floor. With a ding, the doors slowly opened. None of us moved. I think we were all waiting for something to come out of the fog or one of those sirens from Silent Hill to start. Nothing happened. The door started to close, and my friend Amy quickly shoved her suitcase in the way of the door. We all scrambled out. The elevator door closed, and we heard it go down to the ground level again, abandoning us to our fate. Slowly, we all 3 came around to the side of the building. Nothing was there but a long walkway, open to the elements with doors along the left side. Completely terrified now, we crept towards our room, which was halfway down the walkway. We were almost there when we heard it, loud and clear in the night. It was that goddamn elevator returning to the 3rd floor. We sprinted to the room. Chris had the key and frantically tried to get the door open as the other 2 of us stared towards the back of the building to see who would come around the corner. The door was open and we bolted into the room. We locked every lock on that door and braced our suitcases up against it for good measure. We stood inside listening for anything else. We heard nothing. Being the only guy in the group, Chris looked outside after a few minutes, but he couldn't see anything. I don't think any of us slept well that night, and we never stayed in that motel ever again.